I'm Commander Miriam Keene, 39 years old, and I built my career one mission at a time, no shortcuts, no favors, no borrowed legacy. For years, I carried my father's name like both armor and target, earning every stripe in the shadow of an admiral people still call a legend. But when Rear Admiral Marcus Hensley looked me in the eye during a debrief and said, "You'll never be half the soldier your father was, sweetheart," I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought your worth was inherited until they saw what you'd actually done? If so, you're not alone. Tell me your story in the comments. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to prove yourself in silence while others talked over your record, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your respect. What happened next might surprise you. I'd rotated back from an overseas assignment 3 weeks earlier, Lieutenant Commander, 04, late 30s, Air Wing Operations out of Norfolk. The adjustment period should have been routine. Paperwork, debriefs, rotation schedules. Instead, I got Rear Admiral Marcus Hensley. He'd taken command 2 months prior, riding a wave of Pentagon favor and a carefully cultivated reputation for modernizing carrier operations. What that actually meant was consolidating power, rewarding loyalists, and reminding everyone else exactly where they stood in his pecking order. My first encounter with him was in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the operations building. Standard post-deployment debrief, mission summary, lessons learned, recommendations for future taskings. I'd done a dozen of these. They usually lasted 40 minutes. Hensley walked in 12 minutes late, coffee in hand, already talking. "Lieutenant Commander Keene," he said, not looking up from his tablet. "Thomas Keene's daughter, right?" "Yes, sir." I kept my tone neutral, professional. "Your father was a real commander." He smiled then, just enough to show teeth. "Gulf operations. Strategic planning. The kind of officer who could read a room and a map at the same time." He finally looked at me. "Big shoes to fill, sweetheart." The word landed like a slap, but I'd been in the Navy long enough to know when to react and when to file it away. I smiled back, said nothing, continued the brief. Over the next 2 weeks, the comments kept coming. "In staff meetings, your father would have seen that angle faster. In the hallway between briefings, Thomas Keene's kid, let's hope some of that instinct rubbed off. During a tactical review session, you've got the pedigree. Just need the bite to match." Each time, I stayed quiet, responded with facts, data, operational realities. But I noticed the shift. Junior officers started echoing his tone, not quite mocking, but familiar in a way that crossed lines. Recommendations I submitted were suddenly under review. Taskings I'd normally lead were reassigned without explanation. Lieutenant Commander Dana Ruiz pulled me aside after one particularly awkward briefing. "You seeing this?" she asked. "Hard to miss. He's doing it on purpose. Testing you. Or trying to make you crack. Or both." She nodded. "Your father's name is either going to protect you or bury you here. Hensley's the kind who resents legacy he didn't earn himself." I knew she was right. But knowing it didn't make it easier. The thing about military hierarchy is that respect isn't guaranteed by rank. It's negotiated daily through competence, composure, and the unspoken rules of who gets to speak and who gets listened to. Hensley had decided I was someone who inherited position, not someone who earned it. And in his mind, that meant I was fair game. My father had been a captain 06 when I was 10. By the time I was 15, he'd pinned on Rear Admiral. I grew up on bases where everyone knew his name, where people looked at me and saw a reflection of someone else. When I told him I wanted to join the Naval Academy, he didn't congratulate me. He just said, "Then you'd better be ready to prove you belong there." I was 18. I thought I understood what he meant. I didn't. Not really. Not until I showed up at Annapolis and realized that every achievement, every award, every high mark was going to be quietly attributed to his influence. Not nepotism, exactly. Just the assumption that doors had been opened for me that stayed closed for others. So I stopped using his name, stopped mentioning his career, stopped accepting any favor that even looked like it came from his reputation. I ran at 0500 before anyone else was awake. I studied until my eyes burned. I graduated with honors, commissioned as an ensign at 22, and requested assignment to the least prestigious, most operationally demanding unit I could find. I wanted a record that had nothing to do with him. It took 15 years to build it. 3 deployments. 2 distinguished flying crosses. A classified personnel recovery operation in Mosul that earned me a Joint Service Commendation Medal and a call sign I couldn't talk about outside certain clearance levels. Ghost 2. The name came from a 2-ship extraction team, pilot and co-pilot, running low-altitude insertions and emergency evacuations in contested zones. Ghost, because we went in invisible. 2, because I was never the lead pilot. I didn't need to be. The mission wasn't about glory. It was about getting people out alive. Most people in Norfolk didn't know the call sign. It wasn't something you advertised. The operations were classified. The after-action reports were sealed. The commendations were filed in systems that required special access, which meant that to someone like Hensley, someone who measured worth by visibility and reputation, my record looked thin. Confident, maybe, but not impressive. Not legendary. Not like my father's. So when he looked at me, he saw a lieutenant commander in her late 30s who'd spent her career in the shadows, writing a famous name and hoping no one would notice she hadn't matched it. He had no idea what Ghost 2 actually meant. And I wasn't about to tell him. The breaking point came 5 weeks after I'd returned to Norfolk. Joint Command Simulation Review, a closed-door exercise evaluating multi-domain counterinsurgency response protocols. It was the kind of scenario that tested coordination between air, ground, and naval assets under rapidly changing conditions. I'd been assigned to present the ISR integration analysis, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance data pulled from classified feeds and correlated with real-time operational adjustments. It was technical work. Detailed. The kind of briefing that required precision and confidence. I was halfway through the second section when Hensley interrupted. Lieutenant Commander. His voice cut across the room. You're talking theory. I stopped. Looked at him. Sir, this is operational data from your father, he said, leaning back in his chair, had instincts. He didn't need slides and feeds to know what a battlefield looked like. He could read terrain, read the enemy, read his own people. He smiled. You'll never be half the soldier he was. The room went completely still. I could feel the weight of it, senior staff shifting in their seats, eyes dropping to tablets, the kind of silence that means everyone heard it and no one wants to acknowledge it. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there, presentation remote still in my hand, and waited. Hensley gestured toward the screen. Continue. I did. Finished the brief. Answered questions. Filed the summary report. Then I walked out of that room and kept walking until I reached my office, closed the door, and sat down at my desk. I didn't cry. Didn't punch the wall. Didn't call anyone. I just sat there and breathed. 3 hours later, I got the email. My deployment recommendation to SOCOM, Special Operations Command, had been deferred pending operational review. The slot I'd been recommended for had been reassigned to a major who'd been at Norfolk for 6 months and had never deployed outside training exercises. That's when I understood. This wasn't about my father. It wasn't even about me. It was about control. About a man who needed everyone around him to know that he decided who succeeded and who didn't. That respect was something he granted, not something you earned. And I was someone who'd tried to earn it without asking his permission. I pulled up the SOCOM recommendation file and read through the chain of endorsements. My operational commander had signed off. The Air Wing CO had signed off. It should have been automatic. But Hensley had final approval. And he'd killed it. I closed the file. Stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened my personal record and started making calls. I grew up on bases. Military housing, rotation schedules, the rhythm of deployment cycles, and homecoming ceremonies. My father was already a Captain 06 when I was 10 years old, commanding a destroyer squadron out of San Diego. I learned to read formation schedules before I learned to read chapter books. Most people think growing up military means structure, discipline, belonging. And maybe it does, for some families. But when your father is the kind of officer people talk about in admiring, cautious tones, it means something else entirely. It means every mistake you make reflects on him. Every achievement gets attributed to him. Every choice you make is measured against a standard you didn't set and can't escape. My mother left when I was 12. Not dramatically, no fights, no accusations. She just packed her things one afternoon while my father was deployed and moved to her sister's place in Oregon. I got a letter 2 weeks later explaining that she loved me, but she couldn't be a Navy wife anymore. I understood, even then. You can't compete with a career that demands everything. You can't build a marriage around 6-month absences and 3-day visits. And you definitely can't raise a daughter when half her identity is tied to a man who's never home. So I stayed with my father. And I learned to be the kind of daughter who didn't need anything. When I told him I wanted to join the Naval Academy, I was 18. We were sitting in the kitchen of base housing at Norfolk. He'd just pinned on Rear Admiral and taken command of a carrier strike group. He was drinking coffee, reading message traffic on a tablet. I said it straight. I'm applying to Annapolis. He didn't look up. Why? Because I want to serve. There are a lot of ways to serve. I want to do it this way. He set the tablet down, looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, if you do this, people are going to assume you got in because of me. Every promotion, every assignment, every award, they'll assume I made a call. You ready for that? Yes. No, he said. You're not. But you will be. He was right. I got into the academy on my own merit, test scores, athletics, recommendations from teachers who didn't know my father. But the day I arrived at induction day, a senior officer saw my name on the roster and said, Keene? Any relation to Thomas Keene? I said yes. And from that moment on, I was always his daughter first. It didn't matter that I ran faster, studied longer, scored higher than most of my classmates. It didn't matter that I requested the most difficult assignments, turned down the easiest paths, refused any favor that even looked like it came from his influence. People still assumed. So I stopped talking about him. Stopped mentioning his career. When people asked, I gave short answers and changed the subject. I built a wall between his reputation and mine, and I kept it up for 15 years. By the time I commissioned as an ensign at 22, I'd learned to navigate the space between legacy and independence. I requested assignment to Helicopter Sea Combat Squadron, search and rescue, logistics support, nothing glamorous. I deployed to the Persian Gulf at 24. Made Lieutenant Junior grade a year later. At 27, I pinned on full lieutenant, 03, and transferred to a Joint Special Operations unit based out of Bagram. That's where I started flying real missions. Not patrols. Not training runs. The kind of operations that didn't get press releases. The kind where call signs mattered more than rank. I became Ghost 2 at 29. It wasn't an official designation, more of an operational nickname that stuck. I was the second pilot in a 2-ship team running low-altitude insertions and emergency extractions in contested zones. The lead pilot was an Air Force major named Keller. Calm, precise, unshakable. He called himself Ghost Lead. I was Ghost 2. We flew missions that didn't exist on paper. Pulling reconnaissance teams out of Taliban-held territory. Extracting wounded soldiers from remote outposts. Delivering supplies to units cut off from resupply routes. It was dangerous, exhausting, and invisible. No one outside the task force knew our names. No one wrote articles. No one pinned medals on us in public ceremonies. But the people we pulled out knew. And that was enough. Over the next 8 years, I deployed 3 more times. Marawi, Kandahar, Helmand Province. Each time, the missions got harder. The stakes got higher. The list of people I'd helped extract got longer. At 34, I pinned on Lieutenant Commander 04. My father attended the ceremony. He didn't say much. Just shook my hand and said, "You earned it." It was the first time he'd acknowledged that my career was mine. But the truth is, I'd stopped needing his acknowledgement years earlier. I'd built a record that had nothing to do with him. A reputation that existed in classified files and quiet conversations between people who'd been there. Ghost 2 wasn't a myth. She was a designation. A role. A promise that if you were trapped, injured, or surrounded, someone was coming to get you. And that someone didn't care about legacy, lineage, or last names. She just cared about the mission. My father and I didn't talk often after I made 04. Not because of tension, just because we'd both built lives that didn't leave much room for conversation. He'd retired by then, consulting for defense contractors, giving speeches at military conferences. I was still deploying, still flying, still carrying a call sign most people didn't know existed. But every now and then, I'd get a message from him. Short, direct. Usually something like, "Heard you did good work in Kandahar," or "Stay safe." I never asked how he knew. I assumed someone in his network had clearance and kept him informed. It didn't bother me. If anything, it was reassuring. A quiet reminder that, even though we'd lived separate careers, he still understood what I was doing. And maybe, in his own way, he was proud. But pride doesn't protect you from people like Hensley. It doesn't shield you from the assumptions, the dismissals, the casual cruelty of officers who see a famous last name and decide you haven't earned your place. That's the thing about legacy. It follows you. Even when you've spent 15 years trying to outrun it. Even when you've built something entirely your own. For 3 weeks after the SOCOM deferral, I kept my head down. Attended briefings. Filed reports. Coordinated training schedules. Played the role of competent, professional, unremarkable lieutenant commander who knew her place and didn't make waves. It wasn't hard. I'd spent years in environments where visibility got you killed, where the goal was to complete the mission and disappear. So I did what I'd always done. I watched. I listened. And I waited. The thing about people like Hensley is that they're predictable. They need to remind you of their power constantly. They can't just win, they need you to know you lost. So they keep pressing, keep testing, keep escalating until they get the reaction they want. I didn't give him one. In staff meetings, when he made comments about my father, I nodded politely and continued my brief. When junior officers parroted his tone, I responded with facts and moved on. When recommendations I submitted disappeared into bureaucratic limbo, I documented everything and filed follow-up requests through proper channels. I became a ghost in a different way. Present but untouchable. Competent but unremarkable. The kind of officer who does her job, doesn't complain, and doesn't give anyone a reason to notice her. Dana Ruiz saw through it immediately. "You're playing dead," she said one afternoon in the corridor outside the operations center. "I'm playing smart. He's going to keep pushing." "I know. So what's the plan?" I glanced at her. "The plan is to let him think he won." She frowned. "That's not like you." "No," I said. "It's exactly like me." She didn't understand. Not yet. But she would. The truth is, I'd learned a long time ago that the best way to deal with people who underestimate you is to let them. Let them assume you're weak, inexperienced, riding someone else's reputation. Let them make their moves, take their shots, build their case. And then, when the moment comes, let the record speak for itself. I just had to wait for the right moment. It came 4 weeks later. SOCOM reopened the Special Operations pilot slot. Not the same one Hensley had killed, a different tasking, higher clearance, more specialized. The kind of assignment that bypassed standard command review and went straight through JSSC, Joint Special Operations Command. I got the notification on a Wednesday afternoon. Direct email from a major named Ryan Cole, Air Force, assigned to the SOCOM Liaison Office. Subject line, Operational Inquiry, LCDRM, Keene. I opened it. Lieutenant Commander Keene, your name came up in a personnel review for a classified tasking requiring prior Joint Special Operations experience. Request you submit updated service record and clearance documentation NLT Friday, 1700. Contact info below. Respectfully, Major Ryan Cole, USAF. I read it twice. Then I pulled up my personnel file and started compiling documents. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. Because JSOC didn't care about politics. Didn't care about base-level power games or who liked who. They cared about operational history. About missions completed, classifications held, and whether or not you could do the job. And my record, the real one, the classified one, was about to speak louder than anything Hensley could say. I submitted the file Friday at noon. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't mention it in briefings. Just uploaded the documents, sent the confirmation email, and went back to work. 3 days later, Hensley called me into his office. I walked in at 1400 on a Monday. He was sitting behind his desk, tablet in hand, same half-smile he always wore when he was about to make a point. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit." I sat. He set the tablet down, folded his hands. "I've been reviewing your assignment requests." "Yes, sir." "You've been busy. Lot of applications. Lot of ambition." I didn't respond. "Here's the thing, Keen." He leaned forward slightly. "Field work doesn't make you untouchable. You think flying a few missions, earning a couple medals, means you've proven something. But command is different. Leadership is different." He tapped the desk. "Your father understood that. You don't." I held his gaze. Said nothing. He smiled. "Sockham reached out to me about a tasking. Wanted my input on your suitability." My stomach tightened. But I kept my face neutral. "I told them you're competent. Reliable. But not quite ready for that level of responsibility." He paused. "You understand." I understood perfectly. He was going to kill this one too. But then he did something I didn't expect. He opened the encrypted personnel system on his tablet. The kind that required dual authentication and clearance verification. The kind that showed operational records, not just administrative summaries. "Let me pull up your file," he said. "Just to confirm the details." I watched as he entered his credentials. Watched the screen blink through security prompts. Watched his expression shift from confident to confused. Then I watched the color drain from his face. He was staring at the screen. Not blinking. Not moving. Just staring. I knew what he was seeing. Classified/JSOC, Mosul Personnel Recovery Call Sign, Ghost 2 Operational Summary, Redacted, Commendations, Distinguished Flying Cross, 2, Joint Service Commendation Medal, Redacted. His hand froze on the tablet. His jaw tightened. And for the first time since I'd met him, Rear Admiral Marcus Hensley had nothing to say. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just sat there and waited. Finally, he looked up. His voice was quieter. "You're Ghost 2. "Yes, sir." He set the tablet down carefully. "Like it might break." I didn't know. "No, sir." "You didn't." Silence. Then he cleared his throat. "Sockham is waiting for my endorsement." "Yes, sir." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up the tablet again, opened the endorsement form, and signed it. "You're cleared for the tasking," he said. "Dismissed." I stood, nodded, walked out of his office. And as I closed the door behind me, I allowed myself the smallest smile. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped needing to. The base didn't change overnight. Neither did Hensley. But something shifted, subtle, incremental, the kind of shift you only notice if you're paying attention. He stopped calling me sweetheart. Stopped making comments about my father in briefings. When I presented tactical analysis, he listened. When I submitted recommendations, they moved through channels without delay. It wasn't respect, exactly. It was recognition. The acknowledgement that I wasn't who he thought I was. That the file he'd skimmed, the record he'd dismissed, contained things he hadn't bothered to look for. Most people didn't notice. The junior officers, the staff who'd echoed his tone, they kept their distance, uncertain how to adjust. Dana Ruiz noticed. She caught my eye across the conference room one afternoon and raised an eyebrow. I gave her the smallest nod. Lieutenant Eric Lawson, the wing intelligence chief, approached me after a briefing 2 weeks later. "Whatever you did," he said quietly, "it worked." "I didn't do anything." "Right." He smiled. "Well, keep not doing it." I didn't explain. There was nothing to explain. The record had spoken. The rest was just people adjusting to reality. The Sockham tasking came through 3 weeks after Hensley signed the endorsement. Classified mission profile, embedded joint operations team, 6-month rotation. The kind of assignment I'd been working toward for years. I reported to the JSOC liaison office on a Thursday morning. Major Ryan Cole met me in a windowless briefing room with maps on the walls and clearance protocols posted by the door. "Commander Keen," he said, shaking my hand. "Good to finally meet you in person." "Likewise, sir." He gestured to a chair. "Your file speaks for itself. Mosul operation, Helmand Extractions, Kandahar Logistics, you've done the work. Thank you, sir. This tasking is different. Higher visibility, more coordination with ground elements. But the operational tempo is similar to what you've done before. He slid a folder across the table. Read through the brief. Questions, concerns, bring them to me directly. I opened the folder. Scanned the first few pages. Recognized the structure, the terminology, the mission parameters. This was real. This was exactly what I'd been training for. When do I start? I asked. 2 weeks. You'll get orders by Monday. I nodded. Closed the folder. I'm ready. I know you are. He leaned back. One more thing. The team you'll be working with, they know the Ghost 2 call sign. They requested you specifically. I looked up. They did. Word travels in the community. You've got a reputation. He smiled. Thought you should know. I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded. As I walked out of the building, folder tucked under my arm, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not vindication. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. This was the work. This was what mattered. Not the politics, not the power games, not the endless proving and reproving of worth. Just the mission. The people who needed extraction. The teams who trusted you to do the job. Everything else was noise. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Reviewed operational protocols, updated certifications, coordinated with the team I'd be joining. Hensley signed off on my transfer orders without comment. No speech, no acknowledgement, just his signature on the requisite forms. The night before I left Norfolk, my father called. Heard you're deploying again, he said. Yeah. SOCOM tasking. 6 months. Good assignment? Very. Silence for a moment. Then, Miriam. Yeah. You've built something real. You know that, right? I didn't answer right away. Wasn't sure how to. I know, I said finally. Good. Because I do too. We talked for a few more minutes, logistics, timing, the usual. When we hung up, I sat there for a while, phone still in my hand. He'd never said it that directly before. Never acknowledged that I'd done this on my own. That Ghost 2 is mine, not his. It mattered. More than I expected. But the next morning, when I packed my gear and headed to the flight line, I wasn't thinking about him. I wasn't thinking about Hensley or Norfolk or the weeks of subtle warfare that had led to this moment. I was thinking about the mission. About the people I'd be working with. About the job ahead. Because that's what Ghost 2 did. She showed up. She did the work. And she brought people home. The deployment was hard. 6 months of rotating shifts, high-tempo operations, constant coordination with ground teams operating in contested zones. But it was also exactly what I needed. Out there, rank mattered less than capability. Reputation was built mission by mission. And no one cared about your last name. They cared whether you could fly in bad weather, navigate contested airspace, and stay calm when everything went wrong. I could do all of that. By the time I rotated back to Norfolk, I'd logged 43 missions, 2 emergency extractions under fire, and a commendation from the ground team commander. More importantly, I'd remembered who I was. Not Thomas Keene's daughter. Not the officer trying to prove herself to skeptics. Just Ghost 2. And that was enough. Hensley was still at Norfolk when I returned. Still in command. Still running his power games with junior officers and staff who didn't know how to push back. But when I walked into the operations building, he didn't make comments. Didn't smile. Just nodded. Commander. Admiral. That was it. The full extent of our interaction. I was fine with that. Because I'd learned something over those 6 months. You don't win by proving yourself to people who've already decided not to see you. You win by building a record so undeniable that their opinion becomes irrelevant. And mine was already written. 3 months after I returned from the SOCOM deployment, I pinned on Commander 05. The ceremony was held in the base chapel, a small room with wooden pews and flags from every service branch lining the walls. Hensley wasn't there. He'd been reassigned to a Pentagon staff position 2 weeks earlier, a lateral move that everyone understood meant his upward trajectory had stalled. I didn't ask why. Didn't need to. Dana Ruiz pinned one side of my new rank insignia. Major Ryan Cole, who'd flown in from MacDill, pinned the other. My father sat in the back row, quiet, watching. Afterward, there was a small reception in the officers' club. Handshakes, congratulations, the usual polite conversations about future assignments and career progression. I smiled, thanked people, played the part. But the person I wanted to talk to was sitting alone near the window, nursing a glass of water. I walked over. Thanks for coming. My father looked up. Wouldn't have missed it. I sat down across from him. We didn't say anything for a moment. Just sat there, two officers at different stages of the same career, watching the reception happen around us. Finally, he spoke. You've done well, Miriam. Thanks. I mean it. He set the glass down. I know it hasn't been easy. Carrying the name. Dealing with the assumptions. I shrugged. It's part of it. No, he said. It shouldn't be. You earned every step. Every rank. Every mission. He paused. I'm proud of you. Not because you're my daughter. Because you're a damn good officer. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I saw him not as Admiral Thomas Keene, legendary strategist and larger-than-life figure. Just as my father. Thank you, I said quietly. He nodded. Stood up. I should get going. Long drive back. You could stay. There's a hotel on base. I know. But I've got a meeting tomorrow morning. He smiled. Besides, this is your day. Not mine. He shook my hand, formal, professional, and walked out. I watched him go. And I realized something. For years, I'd been trying to separate myself from him. To build a career that had nothing to do with his influence, his reputation, his legacy. But the truth was, I'd learned everything from him. The discipline. The focus. The understanding that respect is earned through consistency, competence, and showing up when it matters. I hadn't been running from his legacy. I'd been building my own version of it. And maybe that was the point all along. The reception wound down around 1900. People drifted out in pairs and small groups, heading back to their quarters or off-base housing. Dana stayed until the end, helping me carry gifts and plaques to my car. You did good, Commander, she said, loading the last box into the trunk. We'll see. Command is different. You'll be fine. You've already done the hard part. What's that? Figuring out who you are. She smiled. The rest is just logistics. I laughed. If only. She closed the trunk. Seriously, though. What's next? Squadron command, probably. Another deployment. Maybe staff time at the Pentagon if I'm unlucky. You'll hate the Pentagon. I know. But you'll do it anyway. If that's where they send me. She shook her head. Ghost 2 at a desk job. That'll be something. Ghost 2 doesn't exist at the Pentagon. Just Commander Keene, sitting through meetings and writing policy memos. Still you, though. Yeah, I said. Still me. We stood there for a moment, the base quiet around us, lights from the buildings reflecting off the pavement. You ever think about what comes after? Dana asked. After what? This. The Navy. The deployments. All of it. I considered the question. Not really. I've spent so long focused on the next step, I haven't thought about the last one. You should. It comes faster than you think. You sound like you're planning an exit. Not yet. But I'm not doing this forever. She looked at me. Neither are you. I didn't argue. Because she was right. No one does this forever. Eventually, you pin on your last rank, take your last deployment, and transition into something else. Retirement, consulting, teaching. Whatever comes next. But that was years away. Maybe decades. For now, I had work to do. 2 weeks later, I took command of a helicopter squadron, 20 aircraft, 60 personnel, operational responsibility for search and rescue, logistics support, and joint task force integration. It was the job I'd been working towards since I commissioned. And it was harder than anything I'd done before. Not the flying. I could fly. Not the operations. I understood operations. It was the leadership. The responsibility. The knowledge that every decision I made affected 60 people who trusted me to get it right. I thought about my father a lot during those first few months. About the way he'd commanded firm but fair, demanding but supportive. About the respect he'd earned not through rank, but through consistency. I tried to lead the same way. Set clear standards. Held people accountable. Backed them up when they made mistakes. Celebrated them when they succeeded. It wasn't easy, but it was right. And slowly, over weeks and months, I started to see the results. The squadron ran smoother. Missions executed cleaner. People stopped second-guessing decisions and started trusting the process. One afternoon, 6 months into command, my maintenance chief, a master chief petty officer with 24 years of service, pulled me aside after a briefing. "Commander," he said, "I just wanted to say, this is the best squadron I've served in." I looked at him surprised. "Thank you, Master Chief. I mean it. You've built something here. People respect you. Not because of your rank. Because of how you lead." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He smiled. "Your father would be proud." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm not doing this for him." "I know. That's why it works." He walked away, leaving me standing there, thinking about legacy, leadership, and what it means to build something that lasts. I never saw Hensley again. Heard through the grapevine that he'd retired early, took a job with a defense contractor, faded into the background. I didn't feel triumphant. Didn't feel vindicated. Just relieved that I didn't have to think about him anymore. Because the truth is, people like Hensley only have power if you give it to them. If you let their words define you. If you accept their version of who you are. I'd stopped doing that a long time ago. And once I did, he became irrelevant. 2 years into squadron command, I was invited to speak at the Naval Academy. Guest lecture for a leadership seminar, 4th-year midshipmen preparing for commissioning. I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my strength. And the idea of standing in front of a room full of future officers, trying to distill 20 years of experience into 45 minutes, felt impossible. But Dana convinced me. "You've got something to say, and they need to hear it." So I flew to Annapolis on a Friday afternoon, reviewed my notes in a hotel room overlooking the Chesapeake, and showed up at the auditorium at 0900 Saturday morning. There were about 70 midshipmen in the room. Mostly men, a handful of women, all wearing uniforms and carrying notebooks. They looked young, eager, a little nervous. I remembered being that age. 21, about to commission, convinced I understood what service meant. I didn't. Not really. Nobody does until they're in it. I started with the basics. Introduced myself, Commander Miriam Keene, 05, Squadron Command, 20 years of service. Gave them the sanitized version of my career. Academy graduate, flight school, multiple deployments, current assignment. Then I stopped reading from notes and just talked. "Here's what they don't tell you at commissioning," I said. Leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's not about having all the answers. It's about showing up consistently, making decisions with incomplete information, and taking care of the people who depend on you. I paused, looked around the room. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have bad days. You're going to work for people who don't respect you, and you're going to have moments where you question whether this career is worth it. A few of them shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the inspirational speech they'd expected. But here's the thing, I continued. The job isn't about you. It's about the mission. It's about the people to your left and right. And if you can remember that, if you can keep focused on what actually matters, then the rest becomes manageable. I talked for 30 minutes. Took questions for 15 more. Most of them were tactical. How do you handle difficult commanders? How do you balance operational demands with administrative requirements? How do you know when to push back and when to follow orders? I answered as honestly as I could. No platitudes. No motivational slogans. Just the truth as I'd learned it. Afterward, a midshipman approached me. Female, about 5'6", dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She looked nervous. "Commander Keene," she said. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you deal with people who assume you didn't earn your position?" I studied her for a moment. Recognized the look in her eyes, the same one I'd seen in the mirror 20 years earlier. "You don't," I said. "You can't control what people assume. You can only control what you do. So you show up. You do the work. You build a record that speaks for itself. And eventually, the assumptions stop mattering. But what if they never stop? Then you find the people who see you clearly and you work with them. Because the truth is, not everyone is going to respect you. Not everyone is going to believe you earned your place. And you can spend your entire career trying to prove them wrong, or you can spend it doing work that matters. I paused. Your choice. She nodded slowly. Thank you, ma'am. What's your name? Midshipman Lee. Harper Lee. Where are you headed after graduation? Surface warfare. Destroyer, if I'm lucky. Good platform. You'll learn a lot. I pulled out a card with my contact information. If you ever need advice, reach out. Seriously. She took the card. Looked at it like it was something valuable. Thank you, Commander. I watched her walk away and thought about all the times I could have used someone to tell me the truth. Someone who'd been through it and survived. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not monuments or medals or names on buildings. Just passing along what you learned so the next person doesn't have to figure it out alone. I flew back to Norfolk that afternoon. Returned to squadron command, to operational schedules, to the daily rhythm of leadership and logistics and making sure everything ran smoothly. But I kept thinking about that conversation. About Midshipman Lee and the question she'd asked. Because it was the same question I'd been asking for 20 years. How do you prove yourself in a system that's already decided who you are? And the answer I'd given her, the answer I'd learned through trial and failure and grinding persistence, was the only honest one I had. You don't prove yourself to the system. You prove yourself to yourself. You build a record. You do the work. You show up when it's hard and stay consistent when it would be easier to quit. And eventually, the people who matter, the ones doing real work, the ones who understand what it takes, they see you. The rest doesn't matter. 3 months later, I got an email from Midshipman Lee. Subject line, commissioned. The message was short. Ensign Harper Lee, USS Gridley. Thank you for the advice. Already using it. I smiled. Wrote back, congratulations, Ensign. Stay sharp. That was it. Brief, professional, the way military correspondence should be. But it felt significant. Like I'd done something that mattered beyond my own career. Like maybe the work I'd been doing, the quiet, invisible, often frustrating work of just being competent and consistent, had created space for someone else to do the same. That's legacy. Not the dramatic moments. Not the big speeches or headline operations. Just the steady accumulation of small actions that make it easier for the next person. I thought about my father again. About the way he'd led. The way he'd taught me, without ever really teaching, just by showing up and doing the job. He'd given me a framework. A set of principles. A standard to measure myself against. I hadn't always appreciated it. Spent years resenting the weight of his reputation, the assumptions it created, the doors it closed as often as it opened. But now, looking back, I understood. He'd given me the tools. I'd built the career. And that was exactly how it was supposed to work. One evening, about a year before I was due to rotate out of squadron command, I was working late in my office. Reviewing maintenance reports, signing off on training schedules, the usual administrative tasks that accumulate when you're responsible for 60 people and 20 aircraft. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Commander Keen. Miriam. My father's voice. Quieter than usual. Dad? You okay? I'm fine. Just wanted to call. I set down my pen. What's going on? Nothing. Just thinking. He paused. You remember when you were 10 and I took you to see the carrier launch ops at North Island? Yeah, I remember. You asked me why I did this job. Why I spent so much time away from home, why I kept deploying, why I couldn't just work a normal job like other fathers. I didn't remember asking that. But I let him continue. I told you it was because the mission mattered. Because someone had to do it. And because I was good at it. He was quiet for a moment. You know what I didn't tell you? What? That I hoped you'd understand someday. Not agree with it. Just understand. I leaned back in my chair. Looked at the stack of reports on my desk, the photos on the wall, the squadron insignia mounted above the door. I understand, I said. I know you do. That's why I'm calling. He cleared his throat. I'm proud of you, Miriam. Not because you followed in my footsteps. Because you made your own path. That's harder. I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment. Thanks, Dad. Anyway, I won't keep you. I know you're busy. I always have time. Good. Let's have dinner next month. I'll be in Norfolk for a conference. I'd like that. We hung up. I sat there in the quiet office, phone still in my hand, and let myself feel something I'd spent 20 years avoiding. Pride. Not in rank or achievement or overcoming obstacles. Just pride in having done the work. In having shown up consistently. In having built something real. The dinner with my father happened 3 weeks later. We met at a restaurant off base, quiet, civilian, the kind of place where no one saluted or cared about rank. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a glass of water and a breadbasket. He looked older than I remembered. Grayer. Thinner in the shoulders. "Commander," he said, standing as I approached. "Admiral," I replied, smiling. We shook hands. Sat down. Ordered food. Talked about logistics, the conference he was attending, my squadron's recent training exercise. It was comfortable. Easy. The kind of conversation two colleagues might have, not a father and daughter navigating decades of complicated history. Halfway through the meal, he set down his fork and looked at me directly. "I need to tell you something." I waited. "When you were at the academy, I got calls. Offers to smooth things over when you struggled with navigation coursework. Suggestions that I could make introductions, open doors, ensure you got the right assignments. I hadn't known that. I never made those calls," he said. "Never pulled strings. Never interfered." "I know. Do you?" He leaned forward slightly. "Because I've wondered, all these years, if I should have. If I made your career harder than it needed to be by refusing to help." "You did help," I said. "Just not the way people expected." "How?" "You taught me that respect has to be earned. That shortcuts create dependency. That the only reputation worth having is the one you build yourself." I paused. "If you'd made those calls, I'd never know if I actually earned any of this. I'd always wonder." He nodded slowly. "That's what I told myself. But there were times I wasn't sure." "I'm sure," I said. "You made the right call." We finished dinner. Talked about his consulting work, my upcoming rotation, the changes in the Navy since he'd retired. Normal things. The kind of conversation that happens when two people finally understand each other. As we walked to the parking lot, he stopped. "Miriam." "Yeah, goes too." He smiled. "That's a good call sign." I looked at him, surprised. "How do you know about that?" "I still have friends in the community. They tell me things." He paused. "They speak highly of you. Not because you're my daughter. Because you're good at what you do." "Thanks. I mean it. You've built something I never could. A reputation for being reliable, competent, and invisible when it matters." He put his hand on my shoulder. "That's real leadership. Not the kind that gets headlines. The kind that brings people home." I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded. He dropped his hand. "I should get going. Early flight tomorrow. Safe travels." "You too." "And Miriam." "Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. The Navy needs more officers like you." He walked to his car. I watched him drive away, then stood there in the parking lot for a long time, thinking about legacy, leadership, and what it means to finally step out of someone's shadow. Not by rejecting them. Not by running away. Just by becoming yourself so completely that the shadow stops mattering. 6 months later, I rotated out of squadron command. My replacement was a lieutenant commander named Torres, sharp, experienced, ready for the job. I spent 2 weeks briefing him on personnel, operations, maintenance issues, the small details that make or break a squadron. On my last day, the squadron held a change of command ceremony. Standard protocol, speeches, awards, the passing of the unit flag from one commander to the next. I kept my remarks short, thanked the crew, praised their professionalism, reminded them that the mission was bigger than any individual. Then I stepped aside and let Torres take command. Afterward, people shook my hand, thanked me, wished me well on the next assignment. Dana was there. Major Cole had flown in. Even Lieutenant Lawson showed up. But the person I was looking for was standing near the back, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. My father. I walked over. "Didn't expect to see you here. Wouldn't miss it." It's just a change of command. Happens all the time. Not to my daughter. He smiled. You did good work here, Miriam. Real work. Thanks. We stood there for a moment, watching the reception wind down, people drifting toward their cars. What's next for you? He asked. Staff assignment. Pentagon. Probably a desk job for 2 years. He made a face. You'll hate that. I know. But it's part of the progression. If I want to make O6, I need the staff time. Do you want to make O6? I considered the question. I don't know. Maybe. I'll see how the next few years go. Fair enough. He looked at me. Whatever you decide, make sure it's what you want. Not what the system expects. I will. He nodded. Started to walk away, then stopped. One more thing. Yeah, I know I wasn't always around when you were growing up. I know I prioritized the job over a lot of things I should have prioritized differently. He paused. But watching you now, seeing the officer you've become, I wouldn't change anything. Because you turned out exactly right. I felt my throat tighten. Dad, I'm serious. You're a better officer than I ever was. And a better person. He smiled. I'm proud of you. Not as an admiral. As your father. He walked away before I could respond. I stood there, watching him go, and realized something. For 20 years, I'd been trying to prove I was more than his daughter. More than a legacy. More than a name attached to someone else's reputation. But the truth was simpler than that. I was his daughter. And I was my own person. Both things could be true at the same time. The Pentagon assignment was exactly as bad as I'd expected. 2 years of meetings, policy reviews, inter-service coordination, and bureaucratic navigation. I wore a uniform but rarely thought about flying. I worked with officers who'd never deployed, who measured success in briefings delivered and initiatives launched. It was important work. Just not my work. But I did it. Showed up every day. Built relationships. Learned how decisions got made at levels far above anything I'd experienced in operational commands. And slowly, I started to understand why this assignment mattered. Because military operations don't happen in a vacuum. They happen because someone in a building like this wrote a policy, secured funding, coordinated with allies, and built the structure that made the mission possible. Ghost 2 could fly the mission. But someone had to create the conditions that allowed her to launch. I was learning to be that someone. Halfway through the assignment, I was promoted to Captain 06. The ceremony was small, held in a Pentagon conference room with a handful of colleagues and senior officers. My father attended. So did Dana, who'd recently pinned on Commander herself. Major Cole sent a video message from Afghanistan, where he was deployed with a joint task force. In my remarks, I didn't talk about my career. I talked about the people who'd made it possible. The maintainers who kept aircraft flying. The intelligence officers who provided targeting data. The ground teams who trusted us to extract them when things went wrong. Leadership isn't about being in charge, I said. It's about making sure the people doing the real work have what they need to succeed. That's the job. Everything else is just paperwork. People laughed. Applauded. Shook my hand. But the moment that mattered came later, after everyone had left, when my father and I stood alone in the empty conference room. Captain Keene, he said. Has a nice ring to it. Yeah. Feels strange, though. It always does. You spend so long working toward the next rank, and then you get there and realize it's just more responsibility. Exactly. He looked at me. You know what I realized, looking back? What? The rank doesn't matter. The awards don't matter. What matters is whether you did the job with integrity. Whether you took care of your people. Whether you left things better than you found them. He paused. You've done all of that. So whatever comes next, you're ready. I nodded. Thanks, Dad. I mean it. He smiled. And for the record? Ghost 2 is a legend. People still talk about Mosul. How do you know about Mosul? I told you. I have friends. He put his hand on my shoulder. You did something remarkable, Miriam. You built a career on your own terms. That's rare. Don't forget it. He left. And I stood there in the conference room, looking at the new rank insignia on my uniform, thinking about the 25 years that had led to this moment. All the deployments. All the missions. All the quiet, invisible work that no one saw and few people understood. Ghost 2 wasn't a myth. She was a reminder that the strongest people in the room often don't raise their voices. That respect is earned through consistency, not demands. And that sometimes, the quietest file in the system carries the loudest truth. I finished the Pentagon assignment and returned to operational command. This time, an air wing, multiple squadrons, hundreds of personnel, direct operational responsibility during a carrier deployment. It was the job I'd been working toward my entire career. And it was harder than anything I'd done before. Not because of the flying, not because of the operations, because of the decisions. The knowledge that every choice I made rippled through hundreds of lives. That mistakes had consequences I couldn't control or fix. I thought about my father constantly during those first months. About how he'd carried that weight. About what it cost him. Now I understood. The deployment lasted 8 months. We operated in the South China Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Eastern Mediterranean. Executed missions I couldn't talk about, supported operations that would never make headlines, brought everyone home alive. That last part was what mattered most. When we returned to Norfolk, the carrier pulled into port on a gray morning in October. Families lined the pier, holding signs and balloons, waiting for sailors who'd been gone since February. I stood on the flight deck, watching the controlled chaos of homecoming, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Completion. Not pride, exactly. Just the quiet satisfaction of having done the job well. My father was waiting on the pier. I hadn't known he was coming. I found him after the official ceremony, standing near the edge of the crowd, hands in his jacket pockets. "Hey," I said. "Welcome home, Captain." "Thanks. How long have you been here?" "Couple hours. Wanted to see the arrival." We walked toward the parking lot, away from the crowds and noise. "How was it?" he asked. "Long, hard." "Good." He nodded. That's usually how it goes. We reached his car. He unlocked it but didn't get in. "Miriam," he said. "I need to tell you something." I waited. "I'm sick." He said it plainly, without drama. "Cancer. Pancreatic. Stage 4. I felt the ground shift beneath me. "What?" "They found it 6 months ago. I didn't tell you because you were deployed and there was nothing you could do. Dad, I'm telling you now because I want you to know. Not because I need anything. I've made my peace with it." I stared at him. This man who'd seemed invincible my entire life. Who'd commanded carrier strike groups, advised presidents, built a reputation that outlasted his service. He looked small. Tired. Human. "How long?" I asked. "They don't know. Could be months. Could be a year. I'm doing treatment," but he shrugged. "It is what it is." I didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to process this. "I'm okay, Miriam," he said gently. "I've had a good run. Did work that mattered. Raised a daughter I'm proud of. That's more than most people get. That's not enough. Maybe not. But it's what I have." He smiled. And I'm grateful for it. We stood there in the parking lot, the sounds of homecoming celebration fading behind us. "I want to help," I said finally. "Whatever you need." "I know. But what I need is for you to keep doing what you're doing. Keep leading. Keep flying. Keep being Ghost 2. He paused. "That's how you help. By living your life fully. Not by sitting in a hospital room watching me decline." "Dad, I'm serious. I've watched you build something extraordinary. Don't stop now because I'm sick." That's not what I want. I wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that I could take leave, be there, do something. But I knew he was right. This was his fight, not mine. And the best way to honor him was to keep doing the work. "Okay," I said. "But I'm calling you every week. And visiting when I can." "Deal." He got in his car. Drove away. And I stood there, watching him disappear into traffic, feeling the weight of mortality for the first time in my life. The next 6 months were a blur. I balanced operational command with weekly phone calls to my father, monthly visits when I could get away, and the constant awareness that time was finite. He stayed strong longer than the doctors expected. Kept consulting, kept attending conferences, kept living like he wasn't dying. But slowly, inevitably, he declined. I was in a meeting at Norfolk when I got the call. Dana pulled me out of the conference room, handed me her phone. "It's your father's aide," she said quietly. I took the phone. Listen to Chief Petty Officer Briggs, the same man who'd served with my father for 15 years, tell me that I needed to come now. I made it to the hospital in Virginia Beach in 40 minutes. Walked into a room where my father lay in a bed that looked too big for him, machines beeping softly, sunlight streaming through the window. He was awake. Barely. "Miriam," he said, his voice weak. "I'm here, Dad." I sat down next to the bed. Took his hand. "You came," he said. "Of course I came." "Good." He smiled faintly. "I wanted to see you one more time. You're going to be fine." "No," he said gently. "I'm not. And that's okay." I felt tears on my face, but didn't wipe them away. "I need you to know something," he said. "Everything I did, all the deployments, all the time away, all the missed birthdays and school events, I did it because I believed the work mattered. But if I could go back, I'd do it differently. I'd make more time. Be more present." "Dad, let me finish." He squeezed my hand weakly. "But watching you, seeing the officer and the person you became, I realized that maybe I did give you something valuable. Not my presence. My example. The understanding that duty matters. That service matters. That doing hard things well is worth the cost. You gave me more than that. Maybe. I hope so." He closed his eyes for a moment. "You're going to do great things, Miriam. Greater than anything I did. Because you understand something I didn't." "What?" "That strength doesn't mean being invulnerable. It means showing up even when you're afraid. Leading even when you're uncertain. Caring even when it hurts." He opened his eyes. "That's real courage. And you have it." I couldn't speak. Just held his hand and tried to memorize everything about this moment. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "Not as an admiral. As your father. I love you, sweetheart." "I love you too, Dad." He closed his eyes again. His breathing slowed. And an hour later, with me still holding his hand, Admiral Thomas Keene died. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery. Full military honors. Flag-draped casket. 3-volley salute. Taps played by a lone bugler. Hundreds of people attended. Officers he'd served with, subordinates he'd mentored, civilians whose lives he'd touched. They lined up to tell me stories about his leadership, his integrity, his impact. I listened. Thanked them. Accepted their condolences. But the moment that stayed with me came at the end, after everyone had left, when I stood alone at the grave site, looking at the fresh-turned earth and the flag folded into a precise triangle. I thought about everything he'd taught me. Not through words, but through example. That leadership is service. That respect is earned. That legacy isn't about monuments. It's about the people you influence and the work you leave behind. He'd given me all of that. And more. And now it was my responsibility to carry it forward. I placed my hand on the headstone. "Thank you," I whispered. "For everything." Then I walked away. Because that's what he would have wanted. For me to grieve. To honor him. And then to keep going. To keep flying. Keep leading. Keep being Ghost 2. That was the legacy. Not a name. Not a rank. Not a reputation. Just the quiet, persistent work of showing up and doing the job. And I intended to keep doing it. For him. For myself. For everyone who came after. 2 years after my father's death, I was still in command of the air wing. Still flying missions. Still leading hundreds of personnel through the daily grind of operational readiness and deployment cycles. But something had shifted. Not in the work itself. In how I approached it. I was less concerned with proving myself. Less worried about what people thought. More focused on the mission and the people executing it. Maybe that was grief. Maybe it was maturity. Maybe it was just what happens when you stop running from your own shadow and learn to stand in it. I thought about my father every day. Not with sadness, exactly. More like a constant awareness of his presence. The lessons he'd taught. The example he'd set. The understanding that leadership wasn't about being perfect, it was about being present. I'd started mentoring junior officers more intentionally. Taking time to answer questions, offer guidance, share the hard-earned wisdom that only comes from years of making mistakes and learning from them. One afternoon, I got an email from Ensign Harper Lee, now Lieutenant Junior Gradley, serving aboard USS Gridley in the Pacific. Subject line, requesting advice. The message was brief. Captain Keene, I'm facing a situation similar to what you described at the academy. Senior officer who doesn't think I belong. Could use your perspective. Are you available for a call? I replied immediately. Tomorrow, 1400. I'll call you. The next day, I closed my office door and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Lieutenant Lee. It's Captain Keene. Tell me what's going on. She outlined the situation. A department head who made comments about her age, her experience, her gender. Nothing overtly hostile, but constant enough to create an environment where she felt like she had to prove herself daily. It was familiar. Too familiar. Here's what I learned, I said. You can't control his perception. You can only control your response. So do the work. Be excellent. Document everything. And find allies, people who see your value and will support you when it matters. That's what you did? Eventually. But I wasted a lot of energy trying to change minds that were already made up. Don't make that mistake. What if it doesn't get better? Then you request a transfer. There's no shame in removing yourself from a toxic situation. But before you do that, make sure you've built a record that speaks for itself. So when you leave, people know it's because you're moving towards something better, not running away. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you, ma'am. That helps. One more thing, I said. You're not alone. Every woman in this Navy has dealt with some version of this. Find your people. Build your network. Support each other. I will. We talked for another 15 minutes. Logistics, career planning, the small details that matter when you're trying to navigate a difficult situation with grace. When we hung up, I sat there thinking about how many versions of this conversation I'd had over the years. With junior officers, with peers, with women trying to find their footing in a system that wasn't always designed to accommodate them. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. Because change doesn't happen through policy alone. It happens through individual relationships, through mentorship, through people taking the time to help the next generation avoid the mistakes they made. That evening, I met Dana for dinner off base. She'd recently taken command of her own squadron and was navigating the same challenges I'd faced 2 years earlier. How's it going? I asked. Hard. Good. Overwhelming. She laughed. You know, the usual. Yeah, I know. We ordered food. Talked about operations, personnel issues, the endless administrative demands of command. Then Dana set down her fork and looked at me seriously. Can I ask you something? Always. How do you do it? How do you stay focused on the mission when everything around you is pulling you in different directions? I considered the question. I think about my father a lot. About how he compartmentalized. How he stayed focused on what mattered and let the rest fall away. Does it work? Sometimes. Other times, I just take it one day at a time. One decision at a time. One mission at a time. That's not very inspiring. No, I agreed. But it's honest. She smiled. Fair enough. We finished dinner. Walked to the parking lot. Stood there under the streetlights, 2 Navy officers in their early 40s, carrying the weight of command and trying to make sense of it all. You're doing good work, Dana, I said. Better than you realize. So are you. We'll see. I've got another deployment coming up. 8 months. That'll be the real test. You'll be fine. You always are. I hoped she was right. 3 months later, we deployed again. Same carrier. Same operational tempo. Different challenges. This time, I found myself thinking less about my father's legacy and more about my own. About what I wanted to leave behind. About the impact I was making or not making on the people I led. I started writing. Not a memoir exactly. Just reflections. Lessons learned. Things I wished I'd known earlier in my career. I didn't know what I'd do with them. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'd share them someday with junior officers who needed guidance. But the act of writing helped. Clarified my thinking. Made sense of experiences that had felt random or meaningless at the time. One entry, written late at night in my stateroom while the carrier cut through dark water, read, "Leadership isn't about being the best. It's about making everyone around you better. It's about creating conditions where people can do their best work." where they feel valued, supported, challenged, where they know that someone has their back. That's the job. Everything else is secondary. I read it back, thought about whether my father would agree, decided he would. The deployment ended in April. We returned to Norfolk on a sunny afternoon, families waiting on the pier, the usual homecoming celebration. But this time, no one was waiting for me. My father was gone. I had no spouse, no children, just colleagues and friends who'd meet me later for dinner. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt peaceful. I'd built a life on my own terms, a career that mattered, relationships based on mutual respect and shared experience. That was enough. As I walked down the gangway, I saw a familiar face in the crowd. Midshipman, no, Lieutenant Junior Gradley, standing near the edge, holding a small sign that read, "Welcome home, Captain Keene." I walked over. "Lee, what are you doing here?" "I'm stationed at Norfolk now. Surface Warfare Officer School. Thought I'd come welcome you back." "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She smiled. "But you showed up for me when I needed it. Figured I'd return the favor." I felt something warm in my chest. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition that the work I'd been doing, the mentorship, the guidance, the investment in the next generation, actually mattered. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." We walked off the pier together, talking about her training, her career goals, the challenges ahead. And I realized something. This was legacy. Not monuments or medals or names in history books. Just people, helping each other, passing along wisdom, making the path a little easier for those who come after. My father had done that for me. Now I was doing it for others. And someday, they'd do it for the generation that followed them. That was the work. The real work. Everything else was just noise. That's my story. Your turn. Have you ever been measured against someone else's legacy? What would you have said if an admiral told you you'll never live up? When did your record finally speak louder than the rumors? If you had a call sign, what would it be and why? Where are you watching from today? Drop your answers in the comments, share this with someone who needs the reminder, and hit like plus subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, leadership, and earning your own name.